When did this replace this? How one man stagnated Western men's fashion for 200 years and how that changed what it means to be manly. If you think about what it means for a Western man to dress nicely, you probably imagine a man wearing a dark-colored suit. Think about award shows and the red carpet events that precede them. Think about the types of questions the celebrities get asked. For female celebrities, the big question is, who are you wearing? How did you decide what to wear tonight? Things like that. In fact, this question is so common that in 2017, Jennifer Seibel Newsom, co-founder of Misrepresentation, helped organize the Ask Her More campaign, trying to encourage reporters to start asking the female celebrities these same interesting, achievement-based questions that they had been asking the male celebrities. So the question is, why weren't the female celebrities and the male celebrities being asked the same questions in the first place? Why weren't the male celebrities being asked, who are you wearing? How did you decide what to wear tonight? Well, simple. Because for the most part, with only a few exceptions, the male celebrities were all wearing basically the same thing. They were all wearing black or dark-colored suits and tuxedos. For generations now, black or dark-colored suits have been the de facto choice for what men are going to wear for a formal occasion. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, if we look back in time, we can see that men tended to use their clothes to show off their wealth and status just like women do, and in fact, men's fashion changed just as frequently as women's fashion did. In the Middle Ages, men wore leggings and tunics. Richer men showed their wealth through using more vibrant colors, excessive use of fabric, and heavy ornamentation. This continued throughout the Tudor, Elizabethan, and Jacobean eras of English fashion. In fact, sumptuary laws starting in the Tudor era even made it illegal for lower-class people to wear certain colors and fabrics and to dress above their station, so that the upper class could really drive home the idea that they were a cut above the rest by using their fashion as status symbols. This ornate style of dress was still popular during the Georgian period, which began with King George I in 1714. As you can see, fashionable men wore voluminous tunics with many layers and heavy embroidery and embellishments. The men wore stockings rather than what we think of as pants. They wore large, ornate wigs and frequently wore heeled shoes as well. Some men, such as the macaronis in the 1770s, even wore fashionable white face paint and rouged their cheeks and lips. And yes, these were the macaronis that are talked about in Yankee Doodle Dandy. So for centuries, the height of men's fashion has consisted of tunics and stockings. The outfits were colorful, voluminous, heavily decorated, and highly ornamented. So what happened? Enter George Byron Beau Brummell, the man who would change the course of men's fashion. Brummell was born to Bill Brummell and Mary Richardson, most likely out of wedlock. Later, Brummell himself would claim that he was born in a servant's attic, but the truth of that claim is unknown, and he was known to exaggerate his rags to riches story. Brummell's father was a former secretary for the Prime Minister, and Brummell grew up fairly comfortably at Hampton Court Palace. Brummell attended Eton College and later Oxford University. At school, he thrived and became popular due to his charm and charisma. He quickly befriended the future King George IV, who was Brummell's key to joining the very exclusive group of rich, aristocratic Londoners who were known as the Ton, or Le Bon Ton. Brummell's charm, manners, good looks, and wit helped him gain popularity both at school and in his new social circle. In 1799, Brummell's father died, and he inherited £30,000. This equates to approximately $3 million modern. While that's a lot of money, he still wasn't on par with his much richer friends. He continued to use his personality and looks to ingratiate himself with the Ton. During this period, Brummell earned the nickname Beau because he was considered the most handsome, charming, charismatic man in London.
Beau was kind of like an Instagram influencer of his day. He was famous for being famous and for his aesthetic. Like any Instagram influencer, Beau's fashion is really what set him apart. He was known as a dandy. The dandies were an up-and-coming group of trendy young men who had turned against the extravagant fashion trends of the time and run completely in the opposite direction. While Beau was not the first dandy, he was and remains to this day the pinnacle of dandyism. His name is practically synonymous with being a dandy. Here you can see a typical dandy outfit as modeled by Beau Brummell himself. Beau wore a plain, unembellished white shirt with a stiffly starched and intricately tied cravat, which was a precursor to the modern tie. Groundbreakingly, Beau wore knee breeches rather than the traditional stockings. Beau himself is sometimes credited with the creation of these breeches, which, during his lifetime, were elongated and then eventually became what we know as trousers. Beau paired his breeches with sensible, low-heeled boots and a plain, unembroidered jacket. Beau finished his look with a top hat and pocket watch. Gone were the vibrant colors of previous styles. Only black, white, and navy for Beau. Beau's ideal fashion was something impeccably refined, yet simultaneously unremarkable. He was known to say, "If people turn to look at you in the street, then you are not well dressed. You are either too stiff, too tight, or too fashionable." He also said, "To be truly elegant, one should not be noticed."
This is not to say that Beau wore cheap clothes and didn't care about his appearance. Beau spent a lot of money and time on his appearance. About $8,000 a year was his minimum requirement for what he considered a proper wardrobe. He was also known to spend 5 to 6 hours a day getting dressed. One of his contemporaries reportedly said of him, "Others dress to live. He lives to dress." In fact, people came to watch Beau go through his daily dressing routine and then scrambled to emulate his style.
In fact, this tendency to live to dress was so well known of the dandies that we have many examples of satirical cartoons from the time period mocking this tendency to spend such a large part of the day dressing. Beau famously lived by 4 rules of hygiene that were revolutionary for the late 18th century and early 19th century England. Beau believed that one must bathe daily, that sweating, which was a popular belief that you could work up a sweat and then scrape off that sweat to get rid of the impurities in your skin, was no match for a good soak in a bath, that one should only use hot water, and that you should avoid scented creams and powders and perfumes.
Beau's famous fashion served to further elevate his status among the upper circles of London society. In fact, Beau was so well respected during this time period that he was known to be a key determining factor in who did and did not receive an invitation to Almack's, the most important social club in all of London society. Failing to procure an invite to Almack's was tantamount to being exiled from high society, and Beau helped control the keys. Beau and his dandies were also instrumental in establishing the idea of black and white tie dress codes in establishments like this. This is the time period when these dress codes came into effect. The dandies began as a small group of young, rebellious men. The simplified style and understated designs were an intentional rebellion against the flamboyant men's fashions of the past. It was sort of a subculture or even counterculture, like the hippies in the 1960s. But the new style did not stay a subculture for long, mostly because of Beau's celebrity. In no time at all, dandy fashion had gone from being seen as youthful rebellion to the go-to men's fashions of the day. One way we can see this growth and popularity of dandy culture is to look at Jane Austen's works. Austen and Beau were contemporaries. Austen was born 3 years before Beau, and although they most likely never met, she was living in the same society that Beau was in the process of challenging. Looking at some of Austen's male characters can help us get some insight into how English society as a whole felt about these new dandy fashions, as well as how those thoughts changed over time. Austen's first two novels were Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice, which were published in 1810 and 1811, respectively. However, Austen started writing both of these novels in the mid-1790s, just as Beau and his dandies were beginning to make their mark on the ton. This is an illustration by C.E. Brock of the male lead of Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy. He is probably Austen's most well-known male character. Mr. Darcy is a proud aristocrat and member of Les Bon Temps, meaning he dresses in the cutting-edge fashions. Dandy style. Note the lack of wig. Note the cut of his simple, dark-colored jacket. No ruffles or ornamentation for Mr. Darcy. Here, we have an illustration of Mr. Darcy with his friend, Mr. Bingley. Bingley's a good guy, but his social status is not as high as Mr. Darcy, meaning that he is not dressing quite as cutting-edge fashionably. While he is certainly not wearing the old-school Georgian style, no wig, no tunic-style jacket, this is certainly not a dandy-approved outfit. Such bright colors. This is Mr. Dashwood from Sense and Sensibility. Note the brightly colored, tunic-like jacket. Note the carefully curled and styled wig. People might notice him in the street when he passes. Based on this outfit, we can tell that Mr. Dashwood is not intended to be a male lead, nor is he really even intended to be a character who we relate to or sympathize with. A decade ago, Mr. Dashwood would have been the height of fashion, but in Beau and Austen's London, this is old-fashioned and passé. Finally, take a look at Sir Eliot from Austen's final novel, Persuasion, which was published in 1817, just after her death. By now, Beau and his dandies were not young, rebellious youths making waves with the status quo. They were the status quo. At this point, dandy fashion was just men's fashion, and dressing like Beau wasn't a symbol that you were young, hip, and part of some inner circle. It was just a symbol that you wore clothes. Sir Eliot is certainly not a protagonist, nor is he a character we are supposed to relate to or sympathize with. But he still dressed like Beau, because that's just what the fashions were now. In fact, by this time, the label of dandy had begun to fall out of favor. Dandies were starting to get ridiculed for their extensive dress routines and uppity personalities. But even though the label was no longer fashionable, the actual fashion was. Think of it like the hipsters in the mid-20-teens. People were constantly making fun of the label hipster, all the while wearing oversized glasses and secondhand sweaters. The label may not be cool anymore, but the fashion is so ingrained in the society that it remains. Also, note, at the beginning of the century, Beau had made waves with his knee breeches. Now, less than 20 years later, we see that the breeches have become ankle length. Loosen them up a little bit, and you are well on your way to having trousers. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Beau's ego and sense of entitlement eventually caught up with him. Remember, Beau was a social climber. He did not have the same resources as the rest of his social circle. Even so, he was known to be a prodigious gambler who had simply used his wit, charm, and close friendship with Prince Regent George IV to evade his climbing gambling debts. But in 1816, Beau finally went too far. That cutting wit that had brought him fame became his fatal flaw.
As the story goes, one night at the theater, Beau turned to a friend and asked, "Who is your fat friend?" That fat friend he was referring to was Prince Regent George IV, who was known to be incredibly sensitive about his ever-growing weight. Suddenly, Beau found himself cut off from good society. His gambling debts were called in, and he was forced to flee to France to avoid debtor's prison.
After fleeing the country, Beau initially settled in Calais, a port city on the Normandy coast of France that had a large English population due to its location on the English Channel. Eventually, After his temper had cooled, King George IV appointed Beau as the British consul in Caen, a city a few hours away from Calais. Unfortunately, Beau only held this position from 1830 to 1832 before the position was abolished, leaving Beau with no work and with even more debt than before. Also around this time, it became apparent that at some point during Beau's heydays on the town, he had contracted syphilis, a disease that had no cure or even effective treatment at the time. Beau wound up settling back in Calais for a few years. While there, his syphilis became too severe to ignore. He began experiencing constant pain, seizures, and delusions. In 1839, he was placed in an asylum, and in 1840, while still in the asylum, Beau Brummell died at age 62, destitute. Beau was buried in Caen. In 2002, a statue by sculptor Irina Sedlecka was erected in London's fashion district, honoring his lasting impact on men's fashion. Beau's abrupt downfall and less than illustrious end did nothing to lessen the impact that he had on fashion. Western men's fashion would never go back to its pre-Beau trends. The suit was here to stay. In fact, his mythos only grew after his death. Now, calling someone a Beau Brummell type is usually taken to mean someone is preppy, dapperly dressed, and wants to be noticed for their excellent fashion choice. Not exactly incorrect, but it doesn't fully encompass what Beau originally stood for in the first place.
In the book English Costume, published in 1906, Beau was said to be the man responsible for raising the level from the slovenly, dirty linen, the greasy hair, the filthy neckcloth, the crumpled collar, to a position ever since held by Englishmen of quiet, unobtrusive cleanliness, decent linen, and an abhorrence of striking forms of dress. Think about men's fashion since the 1840s. Breeches became trousers, cravats became ties, but the basic idea of the men's suit remained the same. At times, we have seen more interesting patterns gain popularity, such as stripes or checks, but by and large, those patterns were still in muted colors: blacks, grays, navies, browns, maybe the occasional dark green. The most fashionable cut and fit of jackets may change, but the three-piece suit remains the foundation of men's fashion in every era since Beau and his dandies.
Western men's fashion can easily be split into pre-Beau and post-Beau. Pre-Beau, fashionable men were expected to show off their wealth by drawing attention to their clothes with sumptuous fabrics, heavy ornamentation, lots of accessories. After Beau, fashionable men were expected to be muted and subdued. Yes, they were expected to spend time and money on their clothes, but the goal was to look effortless. Over time, this goal led to the idea that fashion is only for women. Manly men are supposed to view fashion as frivolous, shallow, not serious. We tend to think of this as the way things have always been, just because that's the way things have been for a while.
But remember, these ideas that fashionable men should be subdued in somber colors and only in suits originated from one arrogant social climber who took 5 hours a day to get dressed, Beau Brummell.